Today, we're diving into a really fascinating and honestly a pretty challenging theological idea. We're going to look at what happens when a divine decree seems to run head-on into human responsibility. We'll be exploring this by looking at specific texts from Islam and Christianity. Let's get right into it. So let's just start with the big question right off the bat. Can something actually be called a sin if you literally have no choice but to do it? If it's completely inevitable? This is the central puzzle we're going to unpack, and it really makes you question some fundamental ideas about choice and justice. Okay, so the whole analysis from our source material kicks off with this specific hadith. And two words just leap off the page: decreed and inevitably. The text isn't saying it's a possibility or a temptation. It's saying a person's share of this act, zina, is pre-written. It's unavoidable. So what on earth does an inevitable share actually mean? To get our heads around the argument, we first got to see how this hadith breaks down the idea of the act itself. You see, the source points out that zina is presented here as more of a spectrum. It's not just the final physical act. It actually starts way earlier, with the zina of the eyes, right, just looking, then the zina of the tongue, speaking, and even the internal desires of the soul. The final physical part, then, is what either confirms all that came before it or denies it. Okay, so keeping that definition in mind, let's zoom out to the big picture, the theology behind all this. To really get what the source is arguing, we need to understand the Islamic doctrine of qadar, which is basically determinism. So qadar, to put it simply, is the belief in divine decree. It's the idea that God has already planned out and written down every single thing that will ever happen. And you can see how this concept is absolutely central to the puzzle we're trying to solve. And this brings us to what the source identifies as the absolute core of the problem. Just look at the cycle. Step 1, Allah decrees the act. Step 2, a person carries out that exact act. And step 3, that same person is punished for doing the very thing that was decreed for them. And you know, this is not a new problem. The source makes it clear that this tension, this apparent conflict between God's decree and a person's responsibility, has been a huge debate in Islamic theology for centuries. I mean, how can you truly be responsible for something that was pre-written for you? Now, to really sharpen this point, the source introduces a contrasting view from the Christian Gospel of Matthew. And it's a fascinating comparison because it makes the main argument crystal clear. So in this verse, Jesus also talks about sin starting on the inside, right? That it begins in the heart with a lustful look. And at first you might think, hey, that sounds a lot like the zina of the eyes we just talked about. But according to the source, the theology underneath it is totally different. And here it is, laid out side by side. This is the key distinction the source is making. While both texts talk about internal sin, the analysis points out that the hadith explicitly says Allah decreed it and that it's inevitable. The verse from Matthew, those elements just aren't there. Instead, the whole context of that verse is a call to repent, to change your ways. So that brings us to the final section. Let's look at the source's own conclusions based on this analysis of decreed sin and the comparison we've just seen.
So what's the bottom line here, according to the source? The argument is that this whole concept of a decreed, inevitable sin, it just creates a cascade of contradictions. It forces you to ask serious questions about divine justice, and it really seems to undermine the very idea of human free will.
The source really boils down its argument into this one powerful sentence. The question it raises is pretty straightforward. If an act is commanded by the ultimate authority, how can punishing the person who does it be considered just? It basically frames the problem as a direct clash between divine decree and divine justice. And then there's this second, equally powerful thought. The source argues that if you take choice out of the equation, the act stops being a moral failing, a sin, and it becomes something else entirely. It becomes a predetermined fate, a sentence that you're simply forced to carry out. And so we end up right back where we started. The source material leaves us with this massive, foundational challenge. Where exactly is the line between divine will and human responsibility? It's a question that has echoed through the centuries, and it continues to shape how we think about faith, freedom, and our own destiny.